Hello and welcome to Engineers from the Home Desk series. I am Samir and I have the pleasure of hosting today Noshir Kaka from McKinsey Company. Welcome, Noshir. Noshir, you advise clients across sectors. What are the top 3 things that global business will do differently in the new normal?
Thanks, Samir. Thank you for having me. And I think, as we think about global businesses, they're actually in an entire range that we can see. There is obviously on the left-hand side of the curve, airlines, oil and gas, even certain banking, which has been hit really, really hard and is really struggling both with resilience and recovery. On the right-hand side of the spectrum, what we see is tech players. We see definitely sectors like healthcare and retail that are actually pretty much rebounding very fast. What we think is most likely, at least what our surveys and so on and our global executives that we've spoken to tell us, is that most CEOs are actually expecting a fairly sharp decline in GDP growth. And you've seen all the numbers from both McKinsey and a whole range of others on various scenarios. We're expecting a fairly sharp reduction in GDP growth for 2020. What we are thinking that those sectors on the right-hand side that I spoke of, actually, if you look historically, they rebound very fast. So tech services, engineering services, what we have seen historically, when you come out of this kind of recession or this shock, they actually recover up to 80% of what they had lost in that period of time. So I think we will be in an entire spectrum depending on where clients are exactly on that environment, on the left-hand side of the curve or on the right-hand side of the curve. But specifically spending in technology, spending in engineering and digital is absolutely going to explode and accelerate as we come through this recession.
That's a very interesting way of putting it, from the left and the right part of the spectrum. How is actually engineering change? How are operating models change? What are the shifts which are happening in terms of technology? What kind of technology partnership that companies will have to develop to stay relevant in today's business environment?
So I think what COVID-19 has done, in my view, is it's essentially accelerated all the trends that we were historically seeing. Right? So every single thing, whether it was online retail, to gig economy, to work from home, you're going to see essentially an acceleration of between 2 years to 15 years. So if you look at some of the most aggressive players in China, the digital attackers, one of our clients, they were telling me that essentially what they got done in the last 2 months, it would have taken them 2 years to do. And they're one of the largest attackers in China. And so we're seeing the story repeat across companies. And effectively, what we are seeing is not just can I do work from home, but we are seeing an entirely new, what we call distributed operating model. So historically, your workforce, you had a few choices. You had on-site, offshore. You had effectively whether they were, close to the engineering group or distant. Now you've got a whole range of this. You've got on-site, offshore, of course. You've got at home versus workplace. You've got your own employee versus gig economy, right? And you're seeing all of this. It was always there, but essentially what has happened is because we've been forced by this environment to go 90-95% remote, people have started understanding that, hey, it's not so bad, and maybe I can do this. Now, of course, there is going to be an impact on long-term morale and workforce if we do this in the long term. But certainly, I think we've gone from an environment where you had, in engineering terms, 100% of the people either with you, close to you, or your own employees, to now what we think is a much more distributed model. Right? And that's just one of the shifts. We're going to see several other shifts occurring. For example, the spend bases are actually actively accelerating outside of the chief engineering officer, the CIO, the CTO, towards business, because we know that many times business folks have had to actually find a solution. For example, if it was an online solution in retail or an omni-channel solution, very fast, and they almost went out and looked for a full stack solution. On the other side, we see cloud migration and cybersecurity absolutely exploding. cybersecurity for all the reasons that we have talked about, and that requires real engineering depth at various levels, including the chipset level, to make sure that this work from home philosophy that we have been forced into actually takes practice. So I actually think, across the range of engineering, you're going to see a completely different distributed operating model. You're going to see new players actually doing things that we never had thought about in terms of productivity and driving new opportunities. You're also going to see very different customer challenges. So one client I had, they are a very high-end producer of specialty chemicals. And their chemicals go into some of the luxury perfumes in around the world. And historically, they've always wondered how can they actually get closer to the client? How can they actually do co-development with the client? And we're finding out in this environment, you can engineer solutions that you never thought of before. That's just some of the ways that companies are just adopting very, very different approaches, very, very different stances.
Noshir, allude to things changing from a shift from work from home because of COVID. As people start going back to work, how do you think people will operate differently? How the workplace will change? How are companies now changing and operate in a new paradigm?
So I think as people get back to work, I'd say the first thing is please take care of your health and well-being and that of your family as well. We know that unfortunately this virus is here to stay. And at least in my part of the world, it doesn't show any signs of abating immediately. And so the first thing, both for an employee as well as for the company, is to make sure that the workforce is safe and secure. I think as you go back, I think there are 3 or 4 skill sets that are very new. The first is when you are working in this virtual environment, collaboration and open thinking really matter. So we are looking actually at several employees where we've seen people who actually can adopt to this virtual world and those who just cannot. And so you're going to see a difference in just fundamental skill sets of collaboration and open mind in the sense of bringing in expertise, listening to others, adapting much faster. The second is micro-learning. Everyone's seen the explosion on online courses, partly because you had nothing else to do when you were sitting at home, but partly because you begin to realize that digital and analytics skills are going to be required in the future for just about every job. Barring, of course, physical jobs and physical labor. And you're going to really need that to stay at the cutting edge of your own professional career. So micro-learning, extraordinarily important for the workforce. And then finally, for employers, what I think is interesting, I think there is a third. A third of the companies are still in just recovery, right? Let's get our people, let's get our operations back secure, let's get the SLAs back up. And it's taken an extremely long period of time, and those companies are unfortunately suffering from really bad customer feedback. And that's one group. Then there's a group just ahead of them, which is saying, okay, we're out of that. Now we've got to thinking about how do we become resilient, and how do we actually make sure that our businesses are protected, our accounts are protected, and that we are actually able to, in some ways, come out of this as well as we went into it. And then finally, there is a group, a smaller group, but there are a group of companies that I believe is actually really taking advantage of this situation. And they are saying 2 things. One is, how can we actually reimagine the recovery in such a way that we actually capture disproportionate surplus? You see the digital attackers doing this, right? The speed at which they have pivoted their businesses to being, if I might call it, COVID positive areas. You've seen that extraordinarily quickly with some of the digital attackers. The folks who have control over their data and have access to their systems are really winning because they can work remotely and spin up any environments that they want remotely. And finally, we are seeing a huge push on critical skills. So the ones that are really trying to actually take advantage of somebody else's challenges are hoovering up digital talent even faster. So we see all three of those categories: people who are fighting to recover, people who are looking to become more resilient, and folks who are actually striving to win the recovery. And I would say many companies has probably some proportion of all three, but some have more to the right hand side, some are more to the left hand side.
That's interesting. Noshir, you talk about the one third. Are there changes in top priorities for these companies from a digital perspective? I'm talking about digital priorities. Have there been shifts in the companies that are looking at technologies such as cybersecurity and AI specifically?
There is a huge shift, and it varies. It varies very much by industry. So just to give you a sense, if you're looking at the retail industry today, what's gonna matter is how do you think about the store of the future, AI enabled? How do you think about digital marketing? How do you think about omni-channel sales and marketing? And how do you think about remote enabling your sales force and your workers, right? I mean, if you think about, and that's just one domain in one industry, right? So we have seen a dramatic shift from the business perspective, saying, look, I really need this because without that, I can't even recover, let alone be resilient. Then we've seen from the chief of engineering or as the CIO desk, we've seen four others. We've seen digital service line, digital supply chain, beg your pardon. We've seen cloud enablement. We've seen cybersecurity, and we've seen remote employee health and workforce. Right? We've seen those four service lines almost explode again from a horizontal perspective. And finally, I think you will, on remote product development, I think we're seeing a binary view. Some clients are absolutely putting the accelerator down and saying, actually, I need to reimagine my products, and this is the best time to do it. And there are some others who are essentially deer in the headlights saying, no, we cannot actually spend any more, we need to cut back. I think you've seen all of those, but it's really sector by sector and service line by service line, we're seeing dramatic acceleration or decline depending on how resilient that service line or that sector is to cope.
Thank you so much, Noshir, for taking this time out. The key takeaways for me is bounce back is going to happen. It's going to definitely rebound. Important to work on collaboration and open thinking is very, very critical. And from a product development point of view, it is important to reimagine, and everything's on the table in the time of resilience. This is Samir signing off from Engineering from the Home Desk series. Till next time, stay safe.